What is the most disturbing, unsolved crime today? In the mid-90s, a chilling wave of murders gripped the Maryland and D.C. area. The killer, a man in his 30s, stalked his victims, studying their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was a nightmare unfolding in the shadows. But then, one day, luck intervened. His last victim fought back with a scream that pierced the night, waking her neighbor just in time. He rushed to her rescue, sending the predator fleeing into the darkness. Since that night, the murderer vanished without a trace, but his name still haunts the nation. He's on America's Most Wanted Top 10 list, a ghost that lurks just beyond the light. That's a pretty intense story. It shows how dangerous situations can escalate and the importance of being aware of your surroundings. It's good that the last victim managed to escape and get help. The way people can just disappear like that is unsettling. It's strange to think about someone still being on the most wanted list after all this time. The darkness of that night still haunts me. My mother was murdered when I was just 3 months old, cradled in her arms as she was attacked. I don't know if I fell from her grip or if it was chaos that forced me away, but they say I was discovered in a grimy alley, lying next to her lifeless body. She had been raped and strangled with her own pants, a heart-wrenching scene that chills me to the bone. If it hadn't been for a woman mindlessly tossing trash into a dumpster near an abandoned apartment building, I might not have been found at all. I lay there, helpless, for days, swirling in the shadows of that horror. Now all I crave is to know who ended her life, who unleashed that brutality into our world. That's a heavy story. It's really tragic what happened to your mother and the circumstances surrounding it. It's understandable to want answers about such a life-changing event. The impact of losing a parent in that way is something a lot of people can't relate to. Hope you find some peace in searching for those answers. They called them the Bloody Benders, America's first serial killer family. Picture this: a small tavern in the desolate West during the 1800s, a place where travelers would stumble in, unsuspecting. The Benders welcomed them with open arms, but only because they looked for those who wouldn't be missed. When the moment was right, they struck, cold blood and greedy hands ready to snatch valuables from lifeless bodies. As whispers spread and the law started to close in, the Benders vanished into thin air, leaving behind only echoes of horror. Fast forward to the early 1900s, and a woman in San Francisco, on her deathbed, claimed she was the daughter of this infamous family. Was she speaking the truth, or was it just another chilling tale? No one may ever truly know. That's a pretty grim story. The Benders managed to evade capture for a long time, which is interesting. The idea of a family working together to commit such crimes is unsettling. The deathbed confession adds an element of mystery, though it's hard to verify. It makes you think about how many similar stories could be out there, lost to time. Overall, a creepy chapter in history. Hinterkaifeck, a haunting tale of a murder that unfolded on a desolate German farm in 1922, where 6 members of the Gruber family met a gruesome fate. But what chills the spine even more is that the killer didn't flee. He lingered in their house for days, perhaps even weeks. Just picture the eerie atmosphere as neighbors recalled the strange occurrences leading up to that fateful night. Andreas Gruber confided in them about the unsettling events that had driven his mate away. He spoke of footprints emerging from the dense, dark woods behind the farm. Footprints that never returned. Whispers of footsteps echoing in the attic filled the air, sending shivers down spines. An unfamiliar newspaper appeared without explanation. Keys vanished mysteriously, and when Gruber inspected his tool shed, it was clear someone had attempted to pick the lock, leaving evidence of their intrusion. The timeline of the murders is shrouded in uncertainty. Autopsy reports might hold the key to when each victim was slain, but those chilling details remain elusive. Many believe they were dispatched one by one, starting with Joseph, who was butchered in his crib, followed by Maria in her room. Gruber, his wife, their daughter, and granddaughter met their end in the barn. The most horrifying twist? The granddaughter was the last to die. In her final moments, she tore her own hair out, perhaps having witnessed the unthinkable horror unfold around her. The horror of seeing her loved ones butchered, or merely the sight of their lifeless bodies, drove her to this desperate act. All the victims were beheaded, their skulls sent away for examination but now lost, leaving only the terror behind. Their bodies were interred in coffins, heads absent, a haunting finality. The entire farm was razed to the ground in 1923, leaving nothing but a shrine as a reminder of the evil that once resided there. But here's the chilling part. The murderers stayed behind, living among their remains. Someone tended to the livestock, consumed food from the kitchen, and neighbors even noticed the smoke rising from the chimney, a ghostly reminder that life continued, despite the death of the Gruber family. This story is pretty unsettling. The details of the murders are disturbing, especially how the family members were found and the strange occurrences leading up to it. The fact that the murderer lived there afterwards adds a layer of creepiness. The whole situation seems like it could be a horror movie plot. It's interesting but also really grim to think about all the unanswered questions surrounding it. There's a chilling possibility that young women vanish on cruises more often than we'd like to believe. There are these shady characters lurking on the ships, with connections waiting on shore, always on the lookout for their next target. It doesn't matter if she's traveling solo or with a group. They watch, waiting for the perfect moment. If she steps off the ship for even a second, maybe to take a photo or enjoy the sights, and gets even a little separated from her friends or family, that's when they strike. She can disappear into an alley before anyone even realizes she's gone. So if you travel, stay close to your daughters or girlfriends, especially if she's pretty and white. You never know who's watching. That's a pretty unsettling thought. It really highlights the importance of being aware of your surroundings, especially in unfamiliar places. Keeping close to friends and family while traveling seems like common sense. It's unfortunate that some people take advantage of others' trust and safety while on vacation. Always good to have a plan and look out for each other. I just finished reading this chilling article about a mystery that has haunted a small town for decades. It all points to the mafia having their grim hands in it, and the locals, even the coroner, played their part, feeding the family a story that their children perished in the fire. But here's the unsettling part. Those children were never seen again. Were they whisked away to be adopted or forced into some dark underworld labor? It's eerie to think none of them ever tried to reach out to their family again. Did someone lie to them, convince them their parents were gone? Or were they threatened into silence? What if they were simply taken away on that very day, only to meet a fate far worse than any of us could imagine? It sends chills down my spine. This story does have that mystery vibe. The whole mafia angle adds a layer of intrigue. It's strange how the children didn't reach out to their family. Makes you wonder what really happened. If they were told their parents were gone, or if something more sinister was going on. It's unsettling to think about the possibilities, especially if they're being silenced or hurt in some way. It still haunts me. I remember watching Paradise Lost, then a few years later, the sequel. Every time I think about it, I can't shake the feeling that the stepdad is the one. His DNA was the only thing found at the crime scene that didn't belong to the victims. What gets to me most about this story is how it reminds me of my son, Damon. He's smart and articulate, but considered strange by the standards of our small town. It's chilling to realize that something as simple as musical tastes and the way these boys dress played such a massive part in their wrongful conviction. It's terrifying. It's interesting how personal connections can make a story hit harder. The idea that factors like appearance and interest could influence a conviction is definitely unsettling. It shows how biases can affect justice. It's a tough topic, especially when it directly relates to someone you care about. There's a lot to unpack in situations like this. Summer of 2004, my wife and I found ourselves in a remote Southern Oregon campground, just the two of us, miles away from any road. While we struggled with our tent, a car pulled up beside us and a man sat inside, watching. He didn't say a word, but something about him sent chills down my spine. As we drove to another site, I noticed he was following us, creeping silently down the winding roads. I pushed on, moving to yet another campground, but he still lingered like a shadow. Finally, in a busier area, I decided to face him. I walked up to his car, heart racing. I introduced myself, and to my horror, he echoed my name back. Said he was looking for someone to spend the night with, but all I could feel was dread gnawing at me. I quickly packed our things, my instincts screaming at me to get away. We found safety behind a motel, sleeping indoors that night. I still wonder if he was the kind of guy who vanished without a trace. Working with inmates has shown me a lot, and none have ever made my skin crawl like that stranger. A few months later, I called the police hotline, giving a chilling description. Around 6 feet 1 inch, a white male in his 30s with messy hair, driving an old subcompact from the early 90s. I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something dark. If I hadn't left that first sight, who knows where those choices would have led. Maybe I wouldn't be sharing this story now. That sounds pretty unsettling. Being approached by someone like that while camping can really change the vibe. It's good you trusted your instincts and moved to a safer spot. You never really know who you're dealing with out there. It's interesting to think about what might have happened if you'd stayed. Definitely a memorable experience, even if it's not one you'd want to repeat. He watched the neighborhood closely, choosing his victims with care. He'd make calls, letting the phone ring before hanging up just to know when people were home. Sometimes, he'd hide bindings in the bushes or around the house, as if he was preparing for something darker. During the ER phase of his reign of terror, he prowled those streets relentlessly, creeping through yards and shadows, which finally caught the attention of the police. They started setting traps where prowler activity spiked, but he simply vanished, slipping south into the night. He broke into homes, rummaging through personal belongings and unloading any firearms he found, leaving them useless. On at least one occasion, he taunted a man, daring him to reach for a gun he knew was unloaded. Rumors swirled that he even tapped into phone lines, feeding off their every fear. This story is unsettling. The behavior of the person in question shows a clear pattern of premeditation. It's interesting how they would test boundaries and provoke reactions. The police trying to catch them is a normal response. It also raises concerns about safety in neighborhoods when someone is actively targeting homes and residents. Overall, it paints a tense picture of the area during that time. He wanted to vanish, avoiding every watchful eye, strategically mapping out the surveillance cameras and their blind spots. That construction site or elevator shaft could easily hide a tragic accident that slipped under the radar. I hadn't bothered to read the article at first, but now I find myself drawn to it. And then I discover something chilling. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search the building. That means it's either less likely he met a grim fate there, or it adds a dark layer to the mystery. Perhaps he truly disappeared into those shadows. But there's an unsettling comfort in this one cop's dedication. He admits, "I'm constantly looking for Brian." Even when he's on vacation, commercials flash by, and he can't help but scan for someone who resembles him. Once, while directing traffic at an Ohio State game, he was convinced he spotted Brian striding down Lane Avenue. In the end, it was just Brian's brother, Derek, mindlessly wandering in the same town, forever haunted by the echoes of a brother who might still be out there somewhere. The story hints at some interesting possibilities. It's interesting how someone can study their environment well enough to avoid being seen. The mention of cadaver dogs adds a serious layer, suggesting either hope or despair. The cop's dedication is a nice touch. It shows how deeply he cares. Seeing someone you think is missing must be confusing, especially if it's just their sibling. Overall, there's a mix of concern and curiosity here. I went on a cruise with my family after graduating college, and something truly unsettling happened. Most of the trip, I was battling seasickness, but one night, I decided to return to my cabin early to rest. As I was making my way down the dimly lit corridor, a crew member suddenly grabbed my hand. He had this intense look in his eyes and insisted I join a crew party. My stomach churned not just from the sickness, but from a feeling deep inside that told me this wasn't right. When he asked for my room number in case I changed my mind, I lied, my heart racing. Even now, years later, I can't shake off that feeling. It still gives me the creeps. That sounds pretty unsettling. Being sick already doesn't help, and then a worker pulling you aside like that would definitely make anyone feel uneasy. It's good you didn't give your room number. Trusting your instincts in situations like that is important. It's just a cruise, but those sketchy moments can really stick with you. Glad you got out of it without any issues. My neighbor, a man in his early 70s, went out one night for what seemed like an ordinary trip to the gas station, maybe for a pack of smokes or a beer. But the night took a dark turn. 3 men approached him, guns drawn, their cold metal pressed against his stomach as they demanded his wallet. He handed it over without hesitation, paralyzed by fear. Just when it seemed they'd be gone, the leader turned around and fired a shot right into his back. Miraculously, he survived. He's still here today, living his life, though you could see the weight of that night hangs over him. How he carries on as an alcoholic and a smoker after that terrifying experience is a mystery. But those 3 men? They vanished into the night, leaving behind a man who could have easily been killed. It's sickening to think how close it came to being murder, while those worthless scumbags walked away without a care in the world. That's quite a harsh situation. It's crazy how people can be so reckless. Glad to hear your neighbor is still doing okay despite everything. It's frustrating that the attackers just got away. You'd hope for some justice in cases like these. It's a strange world we live in when something like this can happen over something so trivial. Hope he continues to stay safe moving forward. Investigators believe they fell over a bluff, landing on a ledge high above a river. Injured and desperate, they couldn't climb back up. The river below was impossibly far and too murky to risk jumping in. And there were waterfalls. One wrong move, and they could go over the edge. In the first photo, you can see them frantically trying to signal for help. The second photo is eerie. It shows water that might have been an attempt to catch a glimpse of light or draw attention to a red bag dangling on a branch. One girl likely succumbed to her injuries quickly, maybe even instantly after the fall. The survivor? She might have pushed her friend's body into the river, not just to keep scavengers away, but as a desperate signal for help. She knew that if someone found the body, rescuers would follow the river upstream to find her too. It's chilling to think that the bone fragments were later discovered miles apart, adding to the mystery. In those final days, they showed incredible resourcefulness. One of them managed to survive for 10 excruciating days in the jungle, injured and alone. It's a haunting testament to the strength of will and the instinct to survive. They clung to hope, fighting against the dark until the very end. It's a tough situation for those girls. Falling and being stuck somewhere remote must have been terrifying. Their efforts to signal for help show resilience. The idea of one possibly moving the other to aid and rescue is intense, even if tragic. Surviving for 10 days in such conditions is impressive, highlighting the instinct to fight for survival even when hope seems slim. A sad story overall. He used to be a guy full of life, bursting with ideas and hobbies that consumed his free time. But then something changed. A promotion, they said, more responsibility. A simple 9 to 5 slowly morphed into a never-ending cycle of business calls and 8 a.m. meetings that stripped away his freedom. They called him in, a frantic urgency in his boss's voice, to double-check the finance accounts. Accusations of embezzlement swirled in the air, and the weight of those suspicions crushed him. Night after night, he sat alone, poring over endless numbers, black and red bleeding into his mind like ink on a page, frantically searching for discrepancies that never existed. In the shadows of his once vibrant life, he mourned what he had lost: his free time, his interests, his youth, replaced by an unshakable dread. Maybe that's it. Sounds like Mike is really feeling the weight of the new role. He probably misses having time for himself and the things he used to enjoy. It's tough when work takes over life like that. Being stuck in front of spreadsheets is no fun, especially with trust issues hanging over him. It's a real challenge to balance work and personal time. True fear is a gift. It's that gut-wrenching feeling that can grip you tight, whispering to your instinct, warning you when something isn't right. I remember reading Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, after a close call with a stranger who tried to drag me into his car. It wasn't just a read, it felt like a lifeline. De Becker, a master of understanding fear, has even advised military intelligence, showing how vital it is to recognize real instinct versus irrational panic. Back then, I was just a naive teenager, blissfully unaware of the dangerous situations I kept putting myself in. But that book, that therapist's suggestion, it was as if it saved my life. It taught me to listen to that inner voice, to trust my gut when everything else felt normal, even when it wasn't. It's interesting how fear can be a signal from our instincts. That book sounds like it offers important insights into recognizing when to trust those feelings. It's real how naive choices can lead to dangerous situations. Glad to hear that it made a difference for you. It's good to be aware and learn from experiences like that. Makes you rethink how you approach safety and your instincts. There's something unsettling about the Zodiac killer case that draws people in, isn't there? I mean, sure, you can look at some of the suspects and think they have a shot. But then there's this guy, FB. He's floating around in the background, not exactly a high-profile suspect. That whole "my name is Cypher"? It feels flimsy, like a paper bridge ready to collapse under the slightest weight. And the evidence against him? It's like a collection of whispers in the dark. There's something, but not much. It shuffles him up to the top of my suspect list, but that doesn't mean he's the one. If you peel back the layers, it's clear there's really nothing solid pointing to him. The cipher is just vague enough to fit anyone, and half the stories about him are downright fabrications, spun from thin air by someone who probably didn't know him at all. When it comes to his description, it's a joke. The witnesses painted a picture of a tall, imposing figure, while he was just this tiny little guy. He's like a ghost that almost everyone disregards, and that's got to mean something, right? But if you ask who I lean towards, the truth is I don't lean at all. My gut tells me that none of these suspects are the real deal. Still, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, buried deep in some musty police file, there's a name waiting to be uncovered, a name that might finally put the pieces together. Seems like there's a lot of speculation around this case. It's interesting how some people cling to certain theories while others dismiss them completely. The evidence against FB seems pretty weak, and it sounds like you don't have much faith in the other suspects either. It makes me wonder if the real answers are just buried and will never see the light of day. The complexity of these cases can be frustrating.